Patrick, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start in on Otero County. Their county commission's effort to extend its ICE contract hasn't exactly been straightforward. What's been happening there?
Right, so they've met several times since Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed the Immigrant Safety Act. It doesn't go into effect for a few months. And in that intervening period, they've met a few times seeking to extend the contract for up to 5 years, while also including language that they say will prevent the county from even having the power to exit the agreement. So they're seeking to extend this contract in apparent defiance of the state law, but they've done it in a couple of different ways and have drawn attention from the Attorney General's office both times. The first time, they gave very little notice. They held an emergency meeting that lasted about 12 minutes, and they unanimously approved this contract, only to receive an Open Meetings Act violation notice from the Attorney General, who declared the contract invalid.
Okay.
Basically, he said that they didn't have adequate basis to have held that emergency meeting and should have had more notice.
Okay.
They met again recently to seek to kind of cure that violation, to pass the contract without potentially violating the Open Meetings Act. And the day of that meeting, the county attorney, R.B. Nichols, received another letter from the Attorney General saying that even if you were to cure this OMA violation, you would be violating another state law that requires a state agency to approve these contracts. They went ahead, they approved the contract, and then today the Attorney General filed a petition to the Supreme Court asking the Supreme Court to intervene and deem the contract illegal and prevent them from enforcing it.
Okay, and that happened today. And to clarify, we're talking here on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So where does this process stand now?
I think we just have to wait and see what the Supreme Court does and how they rule. I reached out to the county attorney's office and to see if they
and if they rule at all, right? They don't have to.
Right. So we'll just see what happens there. The Attorney General is committed to keeping the public updated. I would note that the county attorney and the commission in Otero seem to be contemplating some type of action, maybe this one, maybe more in court. They, in addition to approving the contract, they approved a resolution calling for outside counsel in the event of possible litigation. So likely
they're kind of steeling themselves against that, or
Right.
at least kind of building up their capacity
Right.
to take this to court.
Right. I think that might be the next arena for a lot of this stuff.
All right, let's move on to Cibola County. They went kind of a different direction than Otero. What have they been up to?
Right. So the Otero County ICE contract is unique for the reason that the county owns the facility where the ICE detainees are being held.
Whereas in Cibola and Torrance, they don't.
Right. So they are very comparable. They both contract with CoreCivic, which owns and operates the jail in both counties. So as we've been reporting on this for months, we've talked about these contracts and the potential implications of House Bill 9 to interrupt these contracts, but it's always been a possibility in talking to advocates and from county officials that the two entities, ICE and CoreCivic, could contract directly, which would have minimal impacts on the counties.
Yeah, during the legislative session, I spoke with the county manager in Cibola, Kate Fletcher, and she said that she hoped that they would because it would maintain those jobs in that community.
Right, exactly, and the state doesn't really have power to intervene in a private company's ability to contract. It was just these intergovernmental service agreements that basically make the counties.
It almost felt symbolic in removing New Mexico from quote unquote like the business of ICE.
Right, or making them complicit in this mass deportation push. So what's happening in Cibola, similar to what's happening in Torrance, is that they are signaling that they are ready to exit from these agreements, especially given that ICE has announced its intent on government contracting websites to seek a sole source contract with a company that would run both those facilities. And they're hopeful that would be in place by May, which is when the law goes into effect.
And your reporting on Cibola, it seemed to have a bit where they're kind of watching what's happening in Otero, no?
Right. So what they agreed to do at the recent meeting was send a letter to both ICE and CoreCivic that said we are beginning our withdrawal from these contracts. But they noted in the letter that it was possible that a court of competent jurisdiction would be taking up the matter, and so they noted that their contracts could not be terminated if a court were to intervene.
I see. So depending on what happens in Otero, Cibola is kind of saying, well, if something good happens over there for them, we went in on that.
Right. So I talked to the county manager and the chair of the county commission. They both said, we don't know what Otero is going to do, but we wanted to have language in here contemplating the possibility of litigation that would prevent us from having to terminate our agreement.
All right. And then last but not least, Torrance County. What's going on there?
Yeah. So Torrance County had a similar item on the agenda as Cibola County. They are seeking to extend their contract for another month through April 30th.
Because their contract that they had previously extended, it expired this week.
Right.
And so they're seeking to extend it another month through the end of April.
Mm-hmm.
And what else?
But they did note in meeting agenda materials that they had conversations with CoreCivic and recognized that the possibility existed and even the likelihood existed that ICE and CoreCivic would contract directly for the Torrance County detention facility as well. They tried to meet on Monday to extend this contract and discuss this possibility. They decided that because of a typo in the agenda, they didn't want to themselves run afoul of an Open Meetings Act violation,
Okay.
so they're scheduled to meet Thursday morning.
Okay, so later this week, and as we air, it would have been the day before.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another story that you've been covering in some depth, and that is a Canadian uranium company that is seeking to drill in northern New Mexico. They've been seeking approval from the Forest Service to drill in the Carson National Forest. Where does that request stand?
Right. So in late February, Gamma Resources Limited, which is based out of Vancouver, issued a notice of intent to do exploratory uranium drilling in an area called Canjion in the Carson National Forest. They are seeking the Forest Service's permit to drill up to 12 boreholes about 500 feet deep in a 4-mile area that they believe to be full of uranium-rich deposits. Now the Forest Service is reviewing that request to determine if that exploratory drilling would cause substantial surface disruption, and if it does, they would have to invoke a much more thorough environmental review and also bring in a lot more and conduct a scoping report. The Forest Service would have to do all this to evaluate a lot of potential impacts to nearby communities, water, landscape.
So they're deciding whether they may approve this request or they may say a much more extensive environmental review is needed. Is there any timeline for when the Forest Service might make that call?
No, and these do tend to take a while. There have been permits in other national forests that are steadily making their way through, but I think even fast-tracked, we're talking about 3 or 4 years. But it remains to be seen. President Donald Trump has been pushing to expand uranium production and really, on the federal side, really facilitate and quicken these approvals. I would hasten to add, though, that in all of the recent uranium projects in New Mexico, there's also a state process. And in talking to state officials, they have described what they call a robust process that is required before any drilling can occur. And those processes are ongoing, and the company has not yet filed as of April 1st.
Okay, so that would be another step before any of those boreholes
That's right.
were created.
Yeah, it's like a parallel permitting process. They try to coordinate them, but the state has as much power to.
In your reporting, you spoke with Arriba County Commissioner Moises Morales about the project. What did you hear?
Right. So he's deeply concerned about this. From what I understand, this was really a surprise to a lot of people in the area who haven't really had uranium on their radar. But he immediately kind of likened it to a long history there of tension between particularly land grant heirs and the federal government, including the Forest Service. Said it's kind of the long line in decades of injustice, forest mismanagement, and just said he was mobilizing opposition to fight it at every level. So.
And just this week, a Chama Conservation District board member also spoke out. What did you hear from him?
Right. So he similarly was taken aback by the possibility that this could occur. and he is seeking a special meeting with members of the Upper Chama Soil and Water Conservation District just to try to see how they can participate in the process, being a government entity that is tasked with preserving natural resources. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. I don't know if he does either, but he's certainly trying to participate more and convene stakeholders and different tribal governments and communities to make sure that there is a full review, particularly of the watershed, before any uranium is drilled.
And it sounded like he had heard about this potential drilling from your reporting. So he hadn't heard about this before you reported on this. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There has been some concern about the transparency of some of these moves. The company apparently had been working, behind the scenes for a while to establish the leasing rights to get this in place. They're also proposing another drilling operation in Utah. But if you hadn't known to find the website where Gamma Resources had made a pitch to investors about this project, you wouldn't have known it. Okay. Wouldn't have known about it.
And so you've heard from a number of elected officials in opposition. Have you heard of any local officials that are in favor of this idea?
No, not local officials. The company obviously is in favor of it, I think that anytime you talk about uranium in New Mexico, people immediately think about the legacy of public health and environmental impacts. Certainly, that's what Moises was talking about the Grants Mineral Belt and the Navajo Nation, I don't think many local folks are receptive to the possibility.
Okay. And are you going to be keeping an eye on that story as it moves forward?
Yeah, certainly. As we've been doing, there's another pair of uranium mine proposals that are also seeking National Forest Service approval that are near Mount Taylor, which is a mountain sacred to a lot of the Navajo Nation. And so we've been following both the federal and the state permitting process. And on the state side, one of those mines, the state has agreed to hold a public hearing about its permit request. So we're just kind of following every step of the way. Yeah.
All right, and let's move on to a third story. You've been a busy reporter. You've been covering the effort to redevelop the fairgrounds, which has been a months-long process. A new step has been hit in that a plan has been approved. What does that plan include?
The plan is just for what they're calling the first phase, easy wins in a broader transformation project at the fairgrounds. So far, there's been $200 million approximately between bonds and funding in the state budget that is just going to pay for redevelopment projects on a corner of the fairgrounds. It will pay for the acquisition of certain properties that are currently privately held. We'll build a public park. It's going to make pedestrian safety improvements at Central and Lomas and Central and San Pedro, which are two of the deadliest intersections in the state. And it's also going to fund a stadium, and there's money in there for housing as well.
And so you said that it's coming from a few different areas. Can we break that down a little bit? What money will be spent?
Right. So the legislature in 2025 created a new tax district board, basically, that has up to $500 million in bonding capacity that they would get incrementally over the next few years. The legislature approved $92 million in bonds that will go to this project. In addition, they have $100 million in the state budget that is supposed to be $30 million for housing and $70 million for other state fair transformation funds. And then there's another $14 million, I understand, from last year's budget that went to the state fair. So we're talking about 200-something million.
And that's what's been approved so far for phase one. And then, as you said, there's additional bonding capacity down the line for this board.
Right. So the way it was explained to me in talking to one of the designers whose plan the board approved recently, is they are trying to find ways to generate revenue within the boundaries of this district that will pay for future development. Okay. And so the stadium is integral to that. And that is going to be the revenue that they can collect taxes from to fund things like broader transformations. And so that's why they would stress that there's been no decision yet about whether the fair will move, because there isn't, that the earliest phase 2A could begin.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my
Yeah,
questions,
yeah.
because I went to the fair in September and heard from a number of vendors
Yeah.
and attendees who were very concerned about it
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah, absolutely. I did the same thing. And in hearing the presentation from Stantec, which has the contract to do this master plan that was approved, they heard that too. They certainly feel like it was generally a consensus among community members that they didn't want a fair to move. And they said that the earliest decision like that could be made is 2031 at this
Okay,
point.
so a while out.
Yeah.
The only person who voted against this plan was Bernalillo County Commissioner Adrienne Barboa.
Yeah.
What did she have to say about why she voted against it?
Yeah, so she is among a few folks who are paying close attention to this process, who are generally concerned about not about the money. They embrace the fact that there's this much investment occurring, but where the money will be spent, and particularly how it will provide a community benefit, particularly to the International District and other areas. So I think she's awaiting details on some of those things, including on what type of housing could be brought there, whether it's rentals or single family.
So she wanted more information before she cast her vote.
Yeah, basically, the fellow board members tried to reassure her during that meeting that those details would be forthcoming, and that she would be putting the cart before the horse.
And some background on that is that she had come out ahead of the community meeting where this plan was presented, and said that she had heard from the governor's office that there was going to be a significant chunk, $70 million of that $100 million that we talked about that the legislature approved, spent on a stadium in the fairgrounds area for the New Mexico United soccer team. And that she had heard that from former Mayor Marty Chavez, who's kind of spearheading this project for the governor's office. She had kind of dueling news conferences even with Chavez around that idea. The governor's office ended up coming out and saying that Barboa's statements were gossip and fear-mongering, so there was some back and forth about whether there had been some backroom dealings around this stadium, whether New Mexico United was going to live at that stadium, when there's also this other project at Balloon Fiesta Park around a potential United stadium. So that's some background around Barboa's no vote as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think it is an interesting governmental body that is kind of made up from the state legislature and the governor's office and the city council. The mayor of Albuquerque is on it, a city councilor is on it, a member of the neighborhood. So just observing this unscripted seeming kind of clash of people with all their own fiefdoms coming together trying to decide how the money will be spent has been interesting and has caused some friction.
Well, thanks for breaking down these three big stories that you've been covering.